Hey guys, welcome back to Tech Insights with Dylan White. Today we're going to launch into day 3 of our 30-day journey into the SC-900. It's actually day 3 of 25, but who's keeping track, right? Let's just go help everybody get it. Today we're going to dive into the basics of identity concepts, right? Just getting prepping for the SC-900, so we're going to dive into identity concepts. Then we're going to dive into the basic functions of Microsoft Entra. Yesterday we dove into security and compliance concepts. Today we're diving into identity concepts, and then we're going to start diving into the actual product, which is Entra Everything Identity. So let's get it. Stay tuned. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button. It helps. Thanks, guys. All right, guys. So today we're going to dive into two modules. The first one being the identity concepts, and then the second one being all the functions of Entra ID. So remember, we're not going to go through verbatim because I want you guys to learn, but we are going to dive into some diagrams and what each is. So let's get it. So first off, let's go in. Remember, some of these concepts, especially for identity concepts, we already covered in the Microsoft Security 101 modules, right? So you need lots of repetition. So again, we're not going to dive through it all verbatim, but we're going to go through it. So first, we want to understand what authentication and authorization is, right? So if you remember, authentication is the process proving that a person is who they say they are, right? When someone purchases an item with their credit card, they may be required to show their ID, blah, blah, blah. That's authentication, right? Authorization is once after you authenticate, you need to decide where a person can go, right? What are you authorized to do as your identity, right? So a lot of organizations will tell you, hey, you can do this with your user identity, but as an admin, you can do something else. That's authorization. All right, let's go into how we define identity as the primary security parameter. So about 4 years ago, we'll call it, I remember with Secure One, if you stuck with me for that long, I talked a lot about pre-COVID and post-COVID in technology. Pre-COVID, a lot of technology organizations, a lot of vendors still considered your network as the primary security boundary. Now, post-COVID, with everyone working remote, let's admit, probably 75 to 90% of the world has some type of remote working capability, right? If you're working in white collar, 100%, you have some type of remote work capability. But so identity has become that perimeter, right? So digital collaboration has changed. Employees, partners need to collaborate and access organizational resources from anywhere, any device, and without affecting their productivity, right? So if we look at why, right, SaaS applications, critical, right? Business critical workloads hosted outside the corporate network, right? Personal devices in the BYOD methodology. Unmanaged devices by partners or customers when interacting with corporate data or collaborating with employees. Internet of Things, right? IoT devices, etc., installed through the corporate network inside of customer locations, right? That traditional network-based security perimeter is not enough anymore, right? But what do they mean by identity? An identity is a set of things that define or characterize someone or something. For example, a person's identity includes information they use to authenticate themselves, such as their username and password, right? And their level of authorization. An identity may be associated with a user, an application, a device, or something else, right? So we look at this from a perimeter. Remember, I said we're going to talk again, diagrams, right? Identity, how you can get to cloud apps, on-premises devices, your employee, your partners and customers, everything is an identity. Then there's pillars, right? So question you could see on the exam are what are the 4 pillars of identity infrastructure, right? Administration. It's about the creation, management, and governance of identities for users, devices, and servers. Authentication tells a story of how much IT system needs to know about an identity to have sufficient proof that they are who they say they are. Authorization, processing incoming identity data to determine the level of access an authenticated person or service has within an application or service. Auditing, it's all about tracking who does what, when, where, and how. Right? You have to be able to audit all of these actions across all the pillars. Right? So we remember really 2 key things from this section, right? The 4 pillars, right? And why is identity, right? And how is identity the new security perimeter? Right? Definitely going to be questions on the test. All right. So describe the role of an identity provider, right? Or IDP, right? And modern authentication is an umbrella term for authentication and authorization methods between client such as your laptop, phone, or server, like a website or application. At the center of modern authentication is the role of an identity provider. It creates and maintains and manages identity information while offering authentication, authorization, and auditing services. Right? So with modern authentication, all services, including authentication services, are supplied by a central identity provider. Information that's used to authenticate the user with the server is stored and managed centrally by the identity provider. Right? With a central identity provider, organizations can establish authentication authorization policies, monitor user behavior, identify suspicious activities, and reduce malicious attacks. Right? There's a video in here. You guys can go watch it. I'm not going to watch it now, but we'll talk through some of the services, right? So Microsoft Entra ID is an example of a cloud identity provider. Other examples are Google, Amazon, LinkedIn, GitHub. There's also Okta, there's Auth0, there's all kinds of IDPs. Ping is another provider. SailPoint is a provider of an IDP. Salesforce has their own IDP built in. There's all kinds out there. But those are identity providers, right? They provide those critical four pillars. Right? And single sign-on is a fundamental capability of an identity provider in modern authentication. Right? Support for single sign-on, with also known as SSO, with user logs, and that credential is used to access multiple applications or resources. We set up SSO between multiple identity providers. It's called a federation. Right? So you have two or three. So say you have Microsoft, but you also have Amazon, and you have Okta. Right? You have multiple providers, and you set up one account to federate between all three providers. Again, remember, this test is all concepts. No one expects you for this exam to understand these in depth, right? The questions that you're going to be asked are all definitive based, right? So definitions and true false, right? So nothing too crazy. All right. So let's talk about directory services and Active Directory. This is, again, concepts. Don't try to take to the weeds. Stick right here. Stick with me, okay? We're not diving down into AD and what is ADS yet, okay? So concept, in the context of a computer network, a directory is a hierarchical, I'm never going to say that right, structure that stores information about objects on the network, right? A directory service stores directory data and makes it available to network users, administrators, services, and applications. Active Directory, otherwise known as AD, is a set of directory services developed by Microsoft as part of Windows 2000 for on-premise domain-based networks, right? The best known service of the kind is Active Directory Domain Services. It stores information about members of the domain, including devices, users, verifies their credentials, and defines their access rights. A server running ADDS is called a domain controller, also known as a DC. ADDS is a central component in organizations with on-premise IT infrastructure. It gives organizations the ability to manage multiple on-premise infrastructure components and systems using a single identity per user. ADDS doesn't, however, natively support mobile devices, SaaS applications, or line of business apps that require modern authentication methods. Right? So the growth of cloud services, SaaS applications, and personal devices being used at work resulted in the need for modern authentication. Right? So let's dive into the next section. All right, guys, let's dive into the next section. We're going to go into the concept of federation. All right, so what is federation? Enables that. Remember, if we talked just briefly about it, right? It enables the cross-boundary access of organizations to go across domain boundaries, establishing trust relationships between the respective domain's identity provider, right? Lots in there, but we can walk through the diagram. I think a diagram is make it a lot easier. Once again, I'm a visual learner. If you're not, the words are there for you. So if you look at it, you have two different domains, right? Domain B and A, right? And you have two different IDPs, right? So, but you want to create shared access to the website, right? So user authenticates with IDP B, right? IDP A from organization A trusts the IDP B and says, hey, yes, you do have access to that website, right? So the simplified way to think about this federation in this scenario is the website domain A uses authentication services from the A IDP, right? User in B authenticates with their identity provider B, but there's a trust relationship between A and B, right? So that when the user wants to access the website, provides their credentials to the website trusts the user and allows access. Access is allowed because the trust is already established between the two, right? So with federation, trust isn't always bidirectional. right? So although IDP A may trust IDP B, allow users in domain B to access the website, the opposite isn't true, right? Unless the trust is configured. So think about this: just because we have a website, go back to the diagram, we're giving customers, our users, in organization B access. That doesn't mean we have to reverse it, right? Doesn't mean organization B has to give users from A access, right? That's not the goal. So the goal is always to verify, make sure the users need access. So in this one, it's not bidirectional. It doesn't have to be. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. That's a very key concept to know in federation services. Okay? So let's dive into the knowledge check. Right? So what is the benefit of single sign-on? Right? Send it to identity provider, passwords always expire, or user signs in once and then can access many apps. Hopefully everyone knows this. Multiple app access, right? Which relationship allows federated services to access resources? We just did this. It's a trust relationship, right? Authentication is the process of doing what? Who user, device, and who what they say they are. Process of tracking user behavior, enabling federated services. Very simple. Verifying the user. That's authentication. There we go. 100. All right. So then let's go into the next module. All right. So with that being said, we've covered security and compliance concepts. We covered identity concepts. Now we're going to go cover the Entra. So part 2 of the SC-900. We're there. We finished part 1. We've gone through the basic concepts. Now we're getting to the nitty gritty of a product. Right? We're in Entra, everything identity. Okay. So through this, right, so we have some prerequisites. We have learning paths. The first, we're going to walk through all the learning paths, right? It tells you how long. See the stuff I love about Microsoft Learn. You can literally write down your timings. You can study accordingly. It's great, right? So it tells you, hey, there's 7 different units in this module. There's in the next module 7, 5, etc. It also tells you exactly how long for the learning path. It's amazing. Okay. So what we're going to do though first, from this video, we're going to dive into the function and identity types of Entra ID. Right. So let's get into it. So in this module, we should be able to describe the functions of Entra ID. We should be able to describe the different types of identities that Entra ID supports. Okay. So let's get right into it. So what is Entra ID? Right. It formerly was called Azure AD. It's Microsoft Cloud-based identity and access management service. Right. Organizations use Entra ID to enable their employees, guests, and others to sign in and access resources they need, including internal resources, such as apps on your corporate network and internet, and cloud apps developed by your own org, or external services such as M365, and any SaaS apps and network. Right? So Entra ID simplifies the way organizations manage authorization and access by providing a single identity system for their cloud and on-premise applications. Entra ID can be synchronized with your existing on-premise AD. And we talked about that just a minute ago. AD can be synced to the cloud. Okay? And to do that, right, synchronize with other services or use it as a standalone service. You don't need on-premise AD, but you can sync your on-prem. Right? It also allows organizations to securely and enable the use of personal devices such as mobile phones, mobile devices, tablets, and enable collaborations with partners and customers. So here we have a really good diagram, right, of what Entra ID looks like. And so you can connect to business partners, on-premises apps, or the Active Directory, other cloud Azure, right? So public cloud Azure and devices, all connected in, right? So then you have different services in Entra, right? You have an identity secure score, right? So this is a percentage that functions as an indicator for how aligned you are with Microsoft's best practices for your security. Right? So each improvement action in your identity secure score is tailored to your specific configuration in your organization, right? So it's available in all editions of Entra ID, no matter your license type, and is objectively measure your identity security posture, plans, improvements, and read the success of your improvements. Right? So you can actually see the recommendations in real time. Right? So here you can see the improvement actions, right, etc. Right? So here's some basic terminology that's specific to Entra ID. Right? What is a tenant? Right? These are all questions that will most likely be on your test. Microsoft Entra Tenant is an instance of Entra ID in which information about a single organization resides, including organizational objects such as users, groups, devices, and applications. A tenant also contains access and compliance policies for resources such as applications registered in a directory. Each Entra tenant has a unique ID, known as a tenant ID, and a domain name, right? So .onmicrosoft.com. right? And serves as a security administrative boundary allowing an organization to manage and control access to resources, applications, devices, and services, right? And then it includes a directory, right? The term Microsoft Entra Directory meant to turn it are often used interchangeably. The directory is a logical container that holds and organizes various resources and objects related to identity and access management, users, groups, applications, devices. Right? It's a database, catalog of identities and resources associated with the tenant. You can only have one directory in the tenant. Right? But multi-tenant, okay, a multi-tenant organization has more than one instance of Entra ID. Reasons why, right, include with multiple subsidiaries, business units that operate independently, organizations that merge or acquire companies, multi-geo boundaries with various residency regulations. So think of this multi-tenant. You may have 2 or 3 holding companies in one parent organization, right? So you only want to have one, actual or to wrap them up in, but you want to have multi-tenant, right, to keep the boundaries secure. Or for data residency, right? If you have a European country inside your organization, you got to keep all the data in Europe. Right? So who uses Entra ID? It's used by IT admins to control access to corporate apps and resources. Right? Developers use Entra ID for a standard-based approach for adding single sign-on to their apps via API, and subscribers to Azure Services 365 or Dynamics 365 automatically have access to Entra ID. Users of these services can take advantage of included services and can also enhance their Entra implementation by upgrading to premium licenses. Lots in there, but if I'm going to go on this test, I'm going to look at who uses Entra ID. Basic terminology, very important. Secure score, understand what it is, right? And this diagram, right? How it all connects. All right, so what are the different types of identities? All right, again, we're going to look at these. I'm a big diagram person. You have machine identities and human identities. So machine identities, you have workload identities, such as containers, virtual machines, applications, and services. You have device identities, such as mobile devices, IoT, OT, and desktop computers. And then you have human device identities, right? Employees, partners, customers, vendors, consultants, right? A user, obviously, such as an employee or external users, customers, consultants, vendors, and partners. User identities are often characterized in how they authenticate the user type property. So here you get a really good diagram of how the user authenticates. I would definitely understand these diagrams. Right? So you have external or internal users, right? You have external guest or external member. Then you have internal guest or internal member. Important to understand the two differences. Once again, I'm going to go through the diagrams, not necessarily through the verbiage. Right? So workload identities, right? Applications and service principals. Service is essentially identity for an application, right? To delegate its identity and access functions to Entra. Right? It must be registered with Microsoft Entra to enable its integration. And down here, right, you get another really good diagram. Right? As a developer, I want to build an application using, right, any of these with the accesses, right, Key Vault, SQL, storage, whatever, without having to manage any credentials. And you get the two different types, right, of managed identities, which is system assigned and user assigned. You have device identities, right? Entra registered devices, Entra joined, hybrid joined devices. You have groups, right? Security group or Microsoft 365 group. All kinds, right? So you have to understand the basics of each, right? If I were you, got to understand the different types of identities, how they can access, and the different types of users, whether it's a group, right? And then also whether it's external user, internal user, or internal guest user. Understand all these very well in depth, right? And we'll go through each in another video. So what is hybrid identity, right? We've had a rapid pace to move to the cloud, but there's many organizations still rely on on-premises, right? It's accomplished through provisioning and synchronization. Entra directory provisioning is provisioning again between 2 different directory services for a hybrid environment. The most common scenario in the world still today is Active Directory being provisioned into Entra ID. Right? Synchronization is responsible for making sure identity information for your on-premise users and groups is matching in the cloud. That's the whole point of Entra Sync. So here we go. We have a diagram. On-prem to the cloud. So Entra Cloud Sync Provision Engine uses the system for cross-domain identity management, right? Also known as SCIM, right? Just to Entra ID to provision and deprovision users and groups. The SCIM specification is a standard that is used to automate the exchange of user or group identity information between identity domains such as Entra ID. You becoming the de facto standard for provision. Right? It helps automate processes for identity. Very important. Very important to understand the SCIM concept. All right, let's walk through external identities. All right, so we have the following capabilities: B2B collaboration, also known as business-to-business collaboration, B2B direct connect, Microsoft Entra external ID for customers, and then Microsoft Entra multi-tenant organization. Right. So what is B2B collaboration? It enables employees of an organization to collaborate with external users by letting them use their preferred identity to sign into Microsoft applications or other apps. Users are represented here directly, typically as guest users. Right? There's no credentials, none. Right? You invite users to B2B collaboration using their Microsoft. Right? So you're saying, hey, Woodgrove, I'm Contoso. I want your Woodgrove accounting department to access my Contoso. So you're inviting those users in. Right? They're never going to put a password in. You're trusting them, right? So there's a self-service sign-up. There's all kinds of different things. There's entitlement. You give them access to file shares, etc. There's direct connect, right, which is a new way to collaborate with other Microsoft Entra organizations using Microsoft Teams shares channels. Right? With direct connect, you create a two-way trust relationship. Right? And we talked about this trust and federation with the other Microsoft Entra organizations to allow users to seamlessly sign into your shared resources and vice versa. Connect users aren't represented in your Entra directory. They aren't as guests, but they're visible from within Teams shared channel to be monitored in Teams admin center reports. But then when two organizations mutually enable B2B direct connect, you authenticate in their home organization and receive a token from the resource organization for access. Enables Teams Connect shared channels feature. Right? So you can see it right within the Teams. The shared channel owner can search for allowed users from the external organization and add them to the shared channel. Right? So it's very important. So if you're doing a lot of collaboration, if your organizations are doing a lot, you can see where B2B Connect will really be beneficial for your org. And you have external ID for customers, right? So then this is a resource, right? It's a new called now. This is Microsoft. So it might change in 18 months. Microsoft loves changing names. Those of you that are getting into the Microsoft world for the first time, you have to get used to this. So external ID is now known as the new Customer Identity and Access Management Solution, otherwise known as KIAM. The solution is intended for businesses that want to make applications available to their customers using the Microsoft Entra platform for identity and access. With Microsoft Entra External ID for customers, you create a distinct tenant that follows a standard Microsoft Entra tenant model, but is configured for customer scenarios, such as single sign-on with social and enterprise identities, sign up and sign in pages to your apps, add your company branding to the sign in page, provide self-service account management. Right? So if you think about it very simply, like you have a grocery store chain and you provide a vendor portal, or you want to provide a customer portal. Maybe you're a restaurant, or a catering service, you want to provide an actual website. Right? This is all why you would do it. Provides users a little bit more extra security, and you don't have to be responsible for their passwords. So we've seen a lot of adoption of it over the last probably 4 to 6 years, because you can provide all the things like SSO, multi-factor authentication, lots of modern authentication is hugely critical in the new security world we're in. So it really helps reduce the weight and burden of risk. And what is a multi-tenant organization? A multi-tenant organization is that we talked about it just in the last section, right? You have more than one instance of Entra ID, and we talk about the reasons why. You have geo reasons, you have subsidiary reasons, you have parent company, all kinds. But it's just when an organization has more than one Entra tenant. So we've covered a lot. We've covered a lot in this section, this actual module. And now we got the knowledge share. But what we covered is what is Entra ID, the different types of identities, what is hybrid identity, and what is external identities. Right? So let's do a knowledge check and see what we get. Right? So we have a project manager set up a new project from different departments. The project manager wants to ensure the project team members can collaborate and have shared access to a mailbox, calendar, files, and projects shared site. Which Entra feature can the project manager use to accommodate the requirement without having to involve an administrator? We're going to go with the 365 group, right? Because you need access to resources. That's why it's not a security group. An organization has completed a full migration to the cloud and purchased devices for all of its employees. Employees must sign into the device with an organizational account configured in Entra ID. Select the option that describes how devices are set up in Entra ID. Right? So if they need to use the Entra ID to sign in, right, you can either say registered, joined, or devices are set up as hybrid joined. So for full migration to the cloud, it's fully migrated. We're going to go Entry Joint. Developer wants an application to connect to Azure resources that supports Entra authentication, but to manage any credentials without having any extra cost, which often best describes the type of application. This is one I'm always struggling with personally. So once again, we're going to say connect to Azure resources or Entra auth without having to manage any credentials and create extra cost. We're going to go with a service principal. Don't know, it might be a managed identity. It's one of those two. It's not a hybrid identity. It's a managed identity. So I get for second guessing myself. So let's walk through why it wasn't a service principal. So there's, with service principals, there's credentials. That's the main difference. And the reason why it's not service principal managed identity, it eliminates the need for credentials, right? So managed identities don't have credentials. So as you walk through the concepts, right, as you learn, one thing I'm very much forefront about is you should always understand the different concepts and take these modules very seriously when you're walking through as you get ready for the exam, because it will tell you how to prep and how to, you get a question wrong, you write that down, so automatically go in your notes, right? If I'm thinking about, if I get a question about a developer creating an application and the developer doesn't want to manage any credentials, automatically brings you go up manage identity. Okay. So again, we covered a lot. We've got even more to cover. Let's walk into what we have to cover again, because there is quite a bit. So we've covered the function and identity type of identity. Tomorrow we're going to walk into the access management capabilities and threat protection. Two very, very big sections. We'll probably take another 25, 30 minutes. But hopefully today you learned a little bit more about the basic concepts of identity, but you also start to learn why Entra ID is on the forefront of identity providers. And hopefully you guys like it and stay tuned. We've still got 24 more days to go. Thank you guys again. Enjoy your Saturday. See you guys on the other side.